I can fix it. The old beggar's voice cut through the storm just as the billionaire's driver slammed the hood shut and stepped back in defeat. Rain poured across the deserted highway, turning the pavement into black glass. Lightning flashed over the trees, revealing a silver luxury car stranded beside a flooded ditch. Inside, billionaire investor Daniel Mercer stared at his phone as the final bar of signal disappeared. He had less than 40 minutes to reach the airport. If he missed the flight, he would miss the emergency board meeting that could save his company from the biggest collapse in its history. His driver, Marcus, wiped rain from his face. The engine won't respond. Roadside assistance can't reach us for at least 2 hours. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had built an empire by controlling every detail, every negotiation, every person in the room. Yet now, surrounded by cold rain and darkness, all his money could not make one silent engine start. Then the old man appeared. He walked from beneath an overpass wearing a torn brown coat several sizes too large. Water dripped from his gray beard. His shoes were wrapped with strips of plastic, and a faded canvas backpack hung from one shoulder. Marcus immediately moved between him and Daniel. "Keep walking." The old man stopped several feet away. His hands were rough and trembling from the cold, but his eyes remained fixed on the open hood. "I don't want money," he said quietly. "I heard the engine before it died." Daniel looked at him through the rain. The man appeared to be in his late 60s, perhaps older. A thin scar crossed the back of his right hand. Around his neck hung a small metal whistle, scratched and darkened with age. Marcus gave a humorless laugh. "You heard an engine from under that bridge?" The old man nodded. "It wasn't the engine that failed." Daniel stepped closer. Rain soaked the shoulders of his expensive suit. "And you think you know what did?" The beggar studied the car for another moment. He did not seem impressed by its polished body, its custom interior, or the man standing beside it whose name appeared in financial magazines. He simply listened. Then he placed his canvas backpack on the wet road. As it opened, Daniel noticed an old photograph tucked inside a clear plastic sleeve. It showed a much younger version of the beggar standing beside a race car, one hand resting proudly on the hood. Next to him was a little girl holding a silver trophy. Before Daniel could look more closely, the man covered the photograph with a folded cloth. Marcus grabbed his arm. "That's enough. Step away from the vehicle." The old man did not resist. He only looked at Daniel. "You can throw me back under the bridge after I'm wrong." Another flash of lightning lit his tired face. "But if I'm right, you leave tonight." Daniel glanced at his watch. 34 minutes remained. Every sensible instinct told him not to trust a stranger with shaking hands and broken shoes. But desperation has a way of silencing pride. Daniel slowly nodded. Marcus released the old man. The beggar rolled up his sleeves, revealing the scar on his hand more clearly, and leaned beneath the hood. For several seconds, he touched nothing. He simply closed his eyes and listened to the rain striking the metal. Then he reached toward a place the professional driver had never checked. "Start it," he said. Marcus stared at him. "You haven't even repaired anything." The old man's hand tightened around a small hidden cable. "Start the car." The engine coughed once, shuddered, then roared back to life. For a moment, no one moved. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the old man's soaked coat and the water dripping from his gray beard. Marcus stared at the dashboard as though the car had risen from the dead. "What did you do?" Daniel asked. The old man released the cable and stepped away from the hood. "I gave it back what the rain took." He folded his sleeves down, covering the scar on his hand. Daniel should have climbed into the car and left. Every second mattered. Yet something about the old man's calmness held him there. He had not smiled. He had not asked for payment. He simply lifted his canvas backpack from the road and began walking toward the overpass. "Wait," Daniel called. The old man stopped. Daniel opened the rear door. "Get in. We'll take you somewhere dry." Marcus looked at him sharply, but Daniel ignored him. The old man glanced at the clean leather seats, then down at his muddy shoes. "I'll ruin your car. It can be cleaned." The old man gave a tired smile. "Some things can't." His name was Samuel Reed. He sat near the edge of the back seat, holding his backpack tightly against his chest as Marcus drove through the storm. Warm air filled the car, but Samuel continued to tremble. Daniel offered him a bottle of water. Samuel accepted it with both hands. "How long have you been living under that bridge?" Daniel asked. 3 winters. "And before that?" Samuel looked through the rain-streaked window. "I had a home once." The words were simple, but the silence after them felt heavy. Years earlier, Samuel had owned a small repair shop near the edge of the city. It was not impressive, but people trusted him. He could identify a failing engine by sound alone. Customers said he listened to machines the way doctors listen to hearts. Then his wife became ill. Samuel sold the shop, then the house, then every tool he owned. He slept in hospital chairs and worked nights repairing delivery trucks to pay for treatments. She died anyway. A year later, his daughter disappeared from his life after an argument neither of them had known would be their last. Samuel refused to explain what happened. He only touched the old metal whistle hanging from his neck. Daniel noticed the movement. "Was that hers?" Samuel lowered his hand. "She gave it to me when she was 8. She said if I ever got lost, I should blow it and she would find me." Daniel looked away. For the first time that night, the airport seemed less important. At a red light, Samuel opened his backpack to return the water bottle. Daniel saw the old photograph again. Beneath it lay a cracked leather notebook filled with sketches, measurements, and handwritten diagrams of engines. On the final visible page was a drawing of a small safety mechanism circled in red ink. At the bottom, someone had written, "For Lily. So no one else gets trapped." Daniel leaned closer, but Samuel quickly closed the notebook. "Who is Lily?" he asked. Samuel's face changed. The calmness disappeared. Pain moved across it like a shadow. "My daughter. Where is she now?" Samuel stared at the whistle in his palm. "I don't know." Then Marcus spoke from the front seat. "Sir, we've reached the airport." Daniel looked outside at the bright terminal doors, then back at Samuel. The old man was already reaching for the handle. But before he stepped into the rain, Daniel saw something engraved inside the metal whistle. A company name. His company's name. Daniel caught Samuel's wrist before he could step out of the car. "Where did you get this?" Samuel looked down at the metal whistle. Rain hammered the airport roof above them, while private jets waited beyond the glass like silver shadows. "It was given to me. By someone at Mercer Automotive?" Samuel's eyes lifted slowly. "Before it became yours." Daniel felt Marcus watching from the driver's seat. Mercer Automotive had been founded by Daniel's father nearly 40 years earlier. The company no longer built ordinary cars. It produced advanced safety systems, electric drivetrains, and armored vehicles for wealthy clients and government agencies. That old division name had disappeared before Daniel became CEO. Yet it was engraved on a whistle hanging around a homeless man's neck. Daniel led Samuel into the private terminal. The marble floors reflected cold white lights, making Samuel's torn coat and plastic-wrapped shoes impossible to ignore. Passengers stared. A receptionist stepped forward, forcing a professional smile. "Sir, the executive lounge is restricted." "He's with me," Daniel said. The smile vanished. Inside the lounge, Daniel's security chief, Nolan Price, was waiting beside 2 board members. The moment he saw Samuel, his hand moved toward his radio. "Who is this?" "The man who repaired my car." Nolan looked at Samuel's soaked clothes. "Your driver brought a stranger into a secure terminal?" Samuel lowered his backpack to the floor. "I can leave." "No," Daniel said. "Not until I understand that whistle." Nolan pulled on a pair of gloves and opened the backpack before Samuel could stop him. He removed the old photograph, the cracked notebook, a few clothes, and a small tin containing worn mechanical tools. Then he froze. At the bottom of the bag lay an employee badge, faded and split at one corner. Samuel Reed, Senior Safety Engineer, Mercer Automotive. One of the board members laughed under his breath. That badge could be fake. Nolan examined it. The security seal is real. Daniel stared at the old photograph again. Behind the race car stood a building carrying his father's original company logo. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel asked. Samuel's face remained calm. "Because you didn't ask who I used to be." Nolan flipped through the notebook. His expression hardened when he saw the diagrams. "These resemble our current emergency release system." Samuel reached for it. "They resemble my work." Nolan pulled the notebook away. "This contains protected designs. He may have stolen them." The room fell silent. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he did not shout. He simply looked at Daniel. "I fixed your car and asked for nothing." Daniel glanced at the board members. Their suspicion was obvious. Bringing a homeless stranger into the terminal already made him look reckless. Defending him could make it worse. Before Daniel could respond, Nolan received a call. His face changed as he listened. "What happened?" Daniel asked. Nolan covered the phone. "The demonstration vehicle at headquarters has locked itself during the safety test. The doors won't open, and the shutdown system isn't responding." Daniel's blood ran cold. His younger sister, Claire, was inside that vehicle. A technician's voice crackled through the phone. "We've tried every override. Nothing works." Samuel looked toward the sound. "Is it raining there?" Nolan frowned. "Yes." Samuel closed his eyes for one brief second. Then he pointed to the notebook in Nolan's hands. Page 47. Daniel opened it. The page showed the same emergency system used in the trapped vehicle. Across the drawing, Samuel had written one sentence in red ink. "When water reaches the lower sensor, the machine mistakes protection for danger." Daniel looked up. Samuel was already pulling off his wet coat. "Take me to her." By the time they reached Mercer Automotive headquarters, the storm had swallowed the entire city. Emergency lights flashed across the glass building. Engineers crowded around a sealed demonstration chamber while rainwater streamed from the vehicle trapped inside. Through the reinforced window, Claire Mercer sat rigidly behind the wheel, pounding against glass that had been designed not to break. The air system was still running, but the battery temperature was rising. Daniel rushed forward. "Get her out." "We can't," the lead engineer said. "Every override is frozen." Samuel entered behind him in his torn shirt, carrying only the cracked notebook and the small tin of tools. The room turned toward him. Some recognized his name from the old badge. Most only saw a homeless man dripping water onto $1 million laboratory floor. Nolan blocked his path. "He doesn't touch anything without authorization." Claire struck the window again. Daniel saw the fear in his sister's face. "You have my authorization." Samuel moved closer to the chamber. He did not look at the monitors first. He listened. The vehicle emitted a faint rhythmic click beneath the alarm. Samuel's expression tightened. "The system is waiting for a signal that will never come." The lead engineer shook his head. "There is no missing signal." Samuel opened the notebook to page 47. The drawing was old, but the red circle around the lower sensor matched the live diagram on the wall. "You changed the software," he said, "but you kept the original physical relay." One engineer stared at the screen. "That relay was removed years ago." "No," Samuel replied. "You removed it from the plans." He knelt beside the chamber's external service panel. His hands trembled from age and cold, yet every movement was precise. From the tin, he selected a small flat tool worn smooth by decades of use. Nolan leaned toward Daniel. If he damages the system, the battery could fail. Daniel watched Claire press one hand against the glass. Samuel noticed her lips moving. "Help me." He touched the scar on his right hand, then looked at Daniel. "When I open this panel, the alarms will get louder. Do not stop me." The first screw fell to the floor. Then the second. The warning lights shifted from orange to red. A technician shouted, "Temperature is climbing." Samuel removed the panel and reached into a narrow space filled with bundled cables. He paused, feeling rather than seeing. Then his fingers found a thin copper loop hidden behind the main harness. The lead engineer went pale. "That isn't in our system map." Samuel's voice was barely audible. "It was never supposed to be." Years earlier, he had designed the loop as a final human override, a safeguard independent of software. Someone had buried it inside later versions, either from carelessness or fear of admitting the old engineer had been right. Samuel pulled a short wire from his tool tin and joined two contacts. Nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then Claire screamed as the lights inside the vehicle went dark. Daniel lunged forward. "What did you do?" Samuel did not answer. He removed the metal whistle from his neck and pressed its narrow edge against a recessed switch no one else had noticed. A soft mechanical click echoed through the chamber. The driver's door unlocked. Daniel tore it open and pulled Claire into his arms just as smoke began curling from beneath the dashboard. Engineers rushed in, shutting down the battery and surrounding the vehicle. Claire clung to her brother, shaking. Behind them, Samuel remained on his knees. The whistle had snapped in half inside his hand. Claire looked past Daniel and froze. Her eyes settled on Samuel's scar. Then on the broken whistle. Her face drained of color. "Dad?" Samuel slowly lifted his head. And for the first time since Daniel had found him beneath the bridge, the old man began to cry. Claire stepped away from Daniel as if the room had tilted beneath her. Samuel remained on his knees, the broken whistle resting in his palm. Beneath the harsh laboratory lights, he no longer looked like a stranger from beneath a bridge. He looked like a man who had spent years waiting for one impossible moment. "You called him Dad," Daniel said. Claire's lips trembled. "Because he is." The word silenced the entire room. Daniel stared at his sister. Their father had raised Claire from the age of 9. Daniel had always been told she was adopted after a distant relative died. No one had ever spoken about the family she came from. Claire moved closer to Samuel. "I searched for you." Samuel shook his head. "You searched for the man I used to be." Years earlier, Samuel had been the lead safety engineer at Mercer Automotive. His daughter, Lily, often waited for him after school in the workshop, sitting on an overturned crate with a book in her lap while he tested emergency systems. Claire had not always been Claire. Her name had been Lily Reed. The photograph in Samuel's backpack had been taken after she won a children's engineering contest. The silver trophy in her hands was real, but the race car beside them had never been meant for competition. Samuel had built it to test a simple idea: every machine should have a final escape that no computer could control. Then came the accident. During a storm, a prototype vehicle locked with Lily inside. Samuel broke the glass with his bare hand, leaving the scar Daniel had noticed beneath the highway lights. Lily survived. But the company blamed Samuel for the failed test. Daniel's father, Richard Mercer, secretly believed him. He dismissed Samuel publicly to protect the company, then quietly promised to correct the records once the investigation ended. Before that happened, Samuel's wife became critically ill. He sold everything. One evening, exhausted and ashamed, Samuel left Lily with Richard for what was supposed to be a few weeks. "Your mother needed treatment," Samuel whispered. "I thought leaving you somewhere safe was the kindest thing I could do." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Then why didn't you come back?" Samuel looked at the cracked notebook lying on the floor. He had come back. But by then, Richard had changed Lily's name to protect her from the scandal surrounding Samuel. Lawyers told Samuel that returning would risk her future. Richard offered him money, a new job in another state, and a promise that Lily would have every opportunity he could no longer provide. Samuel refused the money. But he accepted the promise. That was the small act of kindness that changed everything. Richard allowed Samuel one final visit. 8-year-old Lily had placed the metal whistle around his neck and said, "If you get lost, I'll find you." Samuel left before sunrise. Years passed. Shame became silence. Silence became distance. By the time he tried to return, Richard had died, the company had changed, and Claire believed her birth father had abandoned her. Daniel picked up the old notebook. On the last page, beneath the words "for Lily," was a signed note from Richard Mercer. Samuel was right. Keep this design alive. Daniel closed his eyes. His father had known. The company had known. Yet the man who saved Claire twice had been sleeping under a bridge. Claire knelt in front of Samuel and took his scarred hand. "I don't care where you've been." Samuel looked at her as though he were afraid to believe her. "I do." She placed the two broken halves of the whistle into his palm. "Then start from here." Across the laboratory, Nolan slowly lowered his head. But Daniel was no longer looking at him. He was looking at the vehicle, the buried override, and the notebook that could prove Samuel's name had been stolen along with his life. Then Daniel turned toward the security cameras. "Lock every company record connected to Samuel Reed." Nolan looked up. "Why?" Daniel's voice became cold. "Because someone buried the truth. And this time, he intended to dig it out." By sunrise, the storm had moved beyond the city. Rain still clung to the windows of Mercer Automotive, but inside the building, the truth was finally coming into the light. Daniel spent the night reviewing archived reports with the company's legal team. Samuel's original designs had been removed from official records, then quietly reused in newer safety systems. Several former executives had protected the company from scandal by letting the world believe Samuel had caused the prototype failure. He had not failed. He had warned them. At 9 that morning, Daniel called an emergency meeting. Executives, engineers, investors, and reporters filled the main auditorium. Samuel sat in the front row wearing borrowed clothes, his old canvas backpack resting beside his polished shoes. Claire sat next to him, holding his scarred hand. Daniel stepped onto the stage. For years, he had spoken with the confidence of a man who believed power meant never admitting weakness. That morning, his voice was different. "My company took a man's work, buried his name, and allowed him to carry the blame." The room became still. Daniel looked directly at Samuel. "I cannot return the years we stole from you." Samuel lowered his eyes. "But I can tell the truth." On the screen behind Daniel appeared Samuel's original safety diagrams, Richard Mercer's signed statement, and the photograph of a young father standing beside his daughter. Daniel announced that Samuel Reed would be publicly recognized as the original creator of the emergency human override system. The company would compensate him for the designs it had used and establish an independent safety foundation in his name. Then Daniel surprised everyone. He stepped away from the podium and walked down to Samuel. "I want you to lead it." Samuel stared at him. "I live under a bridge." "You lived under a bridge," Daniel replied. "That is not who you are." Claire squeezed Samuel's hand. "You always told me machines should never forget the human inside." Samuel looked at the hundreds of engineers watching him. "People shouldn't forget either." No one applauded immediately. The words were too heavy. Then a young engineer stood. Another followed. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose. Samuel did not smile like a man who had won. He covered his face and wept like someone who had finally been seen. In the months that followed, his life changed quietly. He moved into a small house near Claire's home, not the mansion Daniel offered him. He repaired the porch himself and placed the old photograph above the fireplace. The broken whistle was restored by a jeweler, but Samuel refused to erase the crack. "It reminds me that broken things can still call someone home," he said. Claire visited every Sunday. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Sometimes they sat in silence, making peace with the years between them. Daniel changed too. He sold the stranded luxury car and placed it inside the company museum beside Samuel's notebook. A plaque beneath it read, "The night money became useless, kindness restarted the engine." Daniel also opened repair training centers for people facing homelessness, veterans without work, and parents rebuilding their lives. Samuel taught the first class. On opening day, a nervous young man stood before a broken engine and shook his head. "I can't do this." Samuel placed one scarred hand on his shoulder. "Listen before you decide something is finished." The engine started minutes later. And every time Daniel heard that sound, he remembered the old man standing in the rain, wearing broken shoes and carrying a truth no one powerful had bothered to see. Sometimes the person who looks like they need saving is the one carrying the answer. So before you judge someone by their clothes, their job, or the place they sleep, remember Samuel Reed. Kindness may not always change the whole world. But for one forgotten person, it can change everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes people deserve a second chance. Leave a comment about the person who once helped you when no one else did, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be.